Yo, welcome back. My name is Carnite and welcome back to my channel. So, this is a video that a lot of people have requested. Obviously, my first kind of tactical analysis video was understanding Klopp, and in this case I've gone with understanding Conte's Chelsea. Now the reason why I've gone with Conte's Chelsea is because Conte's a lot more versatile than Klopp is, so the 3-4-3 that he uses at Chelsea isn't necessarily what he used with Italy, nor what he used at Juventus, nor what he used at Bari and some of his previous clubs, hence why I've gone with the name Conte's Chelsea. Another thing as well, the last video I uploaded a few days ago, which was my Blackburn Rovers FM save, obviously we're now in the Premier League. If you've not seen that, go check it out. Just click on my channel and you can go and watch some of the episodes. I think I was thanking everyone for being on 90 subscribers, and now I'm almost like on 120, which is amazing. So I've got no idea why that episode in particular, the likes have just shot through the roof. I've got no idea why, but thanks a lot to everyone who's been subscribing, who's been liking the video. Really appreciate it, and hopefully you'll like this video as well. So far this Premier League season, there's been a lot of shouting about with regards to Conte's 3-4-3 that he's playing with Chelsea. Obviously, when he first came in, he decided to go with 4 at the back. They played a bit of a 4-3-3, and that didn't start off well for Chelsea at all. They lost against Arsenal. I think they lost against Liverpool as well, and they were just conceding goals left, right, and centre. And that's when Conte decided, right, I'm going to go back to basics. I'm going to change things around to a 3-4-3. And as we know, it's worked really, really well for both Conte and Chelsea. So going into this video, we're going to take a look at how we can replicate that in FM17. And yeah, let's go. Right, so contents. We're going to start off with a quick debriefing on who exactly Antonio Conte is. Then we're going to take a quick look at the 3-4-3, what Conte, on a very watered down scale, is trying to do or does at Chelsea, the advantages and disadvantages of the system. Understanding the system will not only help us replicate it in Football Manager, but it will help us understand the types of players that we'd need to be able to replicate that system in Football Manager, help us understand the weaknesses of the formation and the style of play, and so on. So then we're going to take a look at trying to replicate the system in Football Manager, obviously, which is our end goal. And then we're going to take a look at the results that the system we've replicated has produced and draw conclusions. So, who is Antonio Conte? He was born in Lecce? I don't know. I don't speak Italian. I think the only words of Italian I know are ciao, which are hello. So ciao, thanks for watching this video, and pizza and spaghetti, and lasagna. So he was born in 1969. He played for 6 years at his local club. Again, I'm not going to try and pronounce that. And then he moved to Juventus, where he played until the end of his career, and almost racked up 300 appearances. So basically, Antonio Conte is not the kind of person you want to mess with, and you can see a picture of him with the magician in Zinedine Zidane. So what a midfield that must have been back in the day. So when you think of Italian football, you think of defence, hard-working style of football, counter-attacking style of football, and to be fair, Italian football is Antonio Conte in a nutshell. He was a phenomenal box-to-box midfielder. He can attack, he could attack, he could defend, he probably still can now, to be fair. Really hard working, really high work rate, constantly running up and down the pitch, you know, just a typical box-to-box midfielder that just never stops running. So I think that players like Marquisio, Vidal, Pogba, you know, players who can do it all, never stop running, Edgar Davids, Clarence Seedorf, that style of player. So not exactly a playmaker, but a type of player who's kind of an all-rounder, and just works like a horse. You can maybe compare him to Conte. Conte tactically very versatile at Chelsea. He now plays with a 3-4-3. Juventus and Italy. Obviously Italy at the Euros he played with a 3-5-2, and at Bari he played with a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-4, however you want to put it. And obviously at the start of his Chelsea reign he played with a 4-3-3/4-1-4-1. I mean, they're roughly the same formation anyways if it's the V in midfield. The thing about Conte is when it comes to your shape, ideally the players you've got will dictate what shape you go for. The truth is, the best managers in the world are versatile managers and modify what they do, even if it's small tweaks, to fit the players at their disposal and fit the opposition they're playing against. And the truth is, this kind of tactical versatility is something we see in football all the time, which is kind of why my rant's now over about why people kind of think certain managers only play a certain way. And there's been a debate, from time to time over whether Conte plays a possession style of football where his teams like to play out the back, or whether they constantly focus on direct counter-attacks. It's honestly depended on the team he's played with. So, for example, Juventus, most of the time, they weren't afraid to play out the back. And they had some great ball-playing defenders. I think it was Barzagli, who used to be the central defender, with Chiellini either on his right or left, and Bonucci. Or maybe it was Bonucci who was the ball-playing defender. I don't remember. But the point is, the Italians have fantastic centre-backs who are technically very, very gifted. So what would happen is, in Juventus's 3-5-2, they'd more than often play it out the back. It didn't mean they didn't go direct when they felt they could go direct. Bear that in mind. They'd sometimes look to play it out the back, sometimes look to go direct. And they've got the players to try and play it out the back when they want to, because a lot of teams used to man-mark Pirlo, who was the main playmaker, kind of playing between the three and the front two in midfield as that deep-line playmaker in the defensive midfield role. So when you've got three at the back, and we'll take a look at this later on as we analyse Chelsea, what normally happens is your three centre-backs, the one on the right and the one on the left, kind of stretch out wide, they kind of become full-backs in a weird way. And then you end up with the central centre-back pushing forward and sometimes taking the ball into midfield, cough David Luiz, because they are technically gifted and they almost create an extra central midfielder, and that's exactly what Juventus used to do. So they used to play out the back at times, but at the same time, it wasn't unusual to see Juventus counter-attack. So, for example, Juventus win the ball back. Buffon rolls it out to the centre-backs. They try and build an attack out the back. Boom, they get tackled. The other team start mounting an attack. But then Juventus quickly win the ball back. With a lot of possession-orientated teams, they'd play the ball back and try and retain possession, give the opposition time to get back into position, and not utilise the counter-attack, because they might not have the pace down the wings, the strength down the wings, players in the middle, a fast enough striker to play a counter-attacking game. In Conte's side, despite the fact that we'd see him sometimes play at the back, despite the fact that sometimes they would dominate possession, particularly when they've got the lead, and being able to play a short possession game and frustrate your opposition and control the game is a really important strategy to have in your locker, by the way, because a lot of teams can't play like that. They don't have the technical players to play like that. But the point is, it wasn't unusual, when possible, to see Conte's Juventus counter-attack with speed and directness. And Conte's teams, regardless of what formation they've used, have always had or been very, very competent at doing both things, which is why his teams have always performed so well. Now, whether or not this would be possible with a lower league team, like a championship team or, a League One team, probably not. But given that he last managed Juventus, he then managed Italy, and now he's managed Chelsea, he's got the players who can fit this style of play, who are adequate to be able to play both styles of play and the versatility required. And this is something he uses to his advantage. So when you think of Antonio Conte, don't think of a certain style of play. Think about a very intelligent manager who trains his team to be able to understand how to play football in many different ways, and he himself understands when these different ways should be executed for the sake of the team, not just based on opposition, but based on the scoreline as well. So, as a personality, Conte's the kind of manager who wears his heart on his sleeve. I think all of us that watched the Euros in the summer will have seen what kind of a manager he is, just jumping up and down on the touchline and, I don't know, jumping into the crowd and mad stuff like that. But I personally like to see that in a manager. He made the headlines for giving Buffon the hairdryer treatment at Juventus, even though they'd secured Serie A. And Juventus were going into the final game of the season on 99 points, and I think they wanted to make it a record 100 points, a century number of points, obviously. And apparently what happened was Buffon came into the dressing room with the club's chief exec and started talking about player bonuses and asking the chief exec, like, how much of a bonus am I going to get for winning the league? And Conte apparently just lost it. And word for word, apparently what he said was, bonuses, you're a disappointment. This is 1-1. He kicked everyone out of the dressing room. This was 1-1 between him and Buffon. You're a disappointment. A defeat from the moment you open your mouth, just like the rest of these half-wits. And that's the kind of person Antonio Conte is. And, you know, you're saying that to Buffon, a legend, but in a way, he has a point. And he didn't want his players to get complacent, and they won that game 3-0. So it worked. Word for word, Pirlo, when he talks, he being Antonio Conte, his words assault you. So he's a very vocal manager who really does wear his heart on his sleeve. But if we look at how well his teams have performed over time, it obviously seems to work because the players have that mutual respect for him. Obviously, Alex Ferguson was another manager who was well known for also wearing his heart on his sleeve, and we all know how he turned out. And when Carlos Tevez was asked about the differences between Conte as a manager and Sir Alex Ferguson, Carlos Tevez said, not many. So very similar in that respect, and that tells you a lot about Antonio Conte's character, and I think we see that on the touchline. But at the same time, you can almost relate it back to the style of player that he was, and also see how that links in with the style of football his teams play. And talking about wearing his heart on his sleeve, I think this is a bit of a highlight from the Euros, where 1-0 up against Spain, 15 minutes to go. Antonio Conte, is he satisfied? No, he's letting his anger out at his players. But anyway, so onto the tactical side of things, the 3-4-3. So it becomes a 5-4-1 off the ball, which obviously makes it incredibly defensively resilient, because you've essentially got your 3 centre-backs, and the 2 wing-backs eventually fall back and make a line of back 5. Your 3 strikers, the 2 wider strikers, i.e. your Hazard and your Willian, and your Hazard and your Pedro, will fall back into midfield, into the space that the wing-backs were previously occupying when they were on the ball, to create a flank of 4 in midfield. And obviously you'll have that lone striker in the form of Diego Costa, who's the lone striker, just, you know, hanging on the back of the last defender or something like that, to create a flank of 5 and a flank of 4. And a lot of people talk about how good the 4-4-2 is defensively, or the 4-2-3-1, because, you know, of how many players you have behind the ball. But this is on another level. This is a wall of 5 players, and then a wall of 4 players all in front of the goal. And that's why Italian football, with these 3 at the back formations, can be so resilient, and it is what Italians are known for. And it's no surprise that they go with these styles of formations and look to play counter-attacking football, because the main basis for counter-attacking football is to be defensively resilient. And you know what they say, if you don't concede, you can't lose. So I know, like, Spaniards would argue with that and say, you know what, I'd rather watch my team play attacking football, for example. But it's all about culture. So we mentioned when Conte first joined Chelsea earlier on this season, obviously they were leaking goals left, right and centre. In their first 7 Premier League games, they conceded 9 goals. But after the whole game, after the whole game, which was the game where Conte switched to the 3-4-3, they then only conceded 1 goal in their next 7 Premier League games. And to be honest, fair play to Conte, because you think about Chelsea's current squad, particularly with David Luiz coming in. David Luiz really fits the ball-playing defender role. You know, he's very good technically. He can walk the ball into midfield. They've got potentially great wing backs in the form of Azpilicueta or Victor Moses in this case, and they brought in Alonso for the left wing, and Gary Cahill and Kurt Zouma, John Terry. They've got a lot of quality centre backs, so use them. Be defensively resilient, because if you want to play on the counter, when you've got players like Willian, Hazard, Diego Costa, you've got the quality to play on the counter attack. You've got the pace to burn and hurt teams. And if you ask me, I think the 3-4-3 suits Chelsea a lot more than the 4-3-3 that Conte came in and tried to apply. And I think the reason why he went for the 4-3-3 was because he knew he was coming into an English side, and he kind of thought to himself, well, 3 at the back formations aren't very common here. You know, tactical familiarity, it's a thing in FM, but it's also a thing in real life. But I guess only he can say exactly what was going through his head. When you're on the ball, the two wing backs obviously kind of become like wingers, so like they become extra midfielders, and the midfield gets packed. And the reason for that is because so you've got your two box-to-box midfielders, and your wing backs become the wingers, so you end up with four in midfield. But from your three strikers, any of these three strikers at any time can come deep and help out the midfield, as well as any of the centre backs moving into midfield as well. Because when one of the three centre backs moves into midfield, you still have two centre backs, so you still get that same number of defensive stability that you'd probably get in a 4-2-3-1, for example. Because when that third centre back moves into midfield, when one or two of the strikers moves into midfield, you've essentially got about 6 players in midfield, and it won't matter what formation your opponent is using, you'll have so many passing triangles and so many players flooding the middle of the park that it will hurt your opposition. And obviously, because you've still got two centre-backs, it won't really hurt you that much defensively, unless your opponent really counter-attack well with wide players. And if that's the case, then I'd like to think someone like Conte would change his approach, which he would do. But the point is that your opposition midfield can get outnumbered very easily. The same way your opposition defence can get outnumbered really easily, because you're essentially almost playing with 3 strikers, and the wing-backs have a licence to roam. They have a licence to push forward. So we're talking about the wing-backs joining in the midfield and becoming a part of the midfield. But when the balls reach the final third, the wing-backs then become strikers themselves, because they push the ball all the way to the byline, or they make runs into the box. They provide that extra bit of width that they lack, because they don't have out-and-out wingers. So you end up with 3 players centrally, causing the 2 centre-backs problems. You've got players overlapping, causing the full-backs problems. And you've got one of the 2 central midfielders also making a run into the box. So whether it's a cross coming into the box, or you building an attack through the middle, it almost seems like you're always going to outnumber your opposition. And when that all happens, you still have a central midfielder in the middle of the park and 3 bloody centre-backs to protect for the counter-attack. And that's the beauty about this formation. And that is why it gives you not just that defensive resilience, but it allows you to also push so many men forward at quick succession and also flood the middle of the park. And that's why it's so good for counter-attacking styles of play as well. So then you kind of got to ask the question of how the hell do you counter this formation? A lot of the time, the best way to counter them is to play with the 3 at the back formation yourself. Especially the 3-4-3. Your opposition will think, well, do I want 2 centre-backs up against 3 central strikers who have pace to burn? Because my full-backs are definitely going to get occupied by the overlapping wing-backs. So to counter that, teams themselves might decide to go with 3 at the back. And that's why we've seen teams like Everton play against Chelsea with 3 at the back. And they themselves try to think, right, well, these wing-backs and these strikers dropping down and the potential centre-back moving into midfield, these are going to cause us problems and probably choke us in midfield. There's going to be more of them than there is of us. What's our solution to playing against that, to give ourselves the extra men in midfield without... Be careful, you can't do that with a 4 at the back formation. It's very risky, because if one of your centre-backs is going to push into midfield in a 4 at the back formation, you're going to end up with only 1 centre-back, yeah? So you got to be careful there. So what can teams do to counteract that style of play? So they more than often try to mimic it themselves, whether it's just 3-4-3 or 3-5-2. And we saw Everton try and do it. I think we saw Southampton try to do it. We've seen a few teams try to employ a similar strategy against Conte, and it hasn't worked, because teams are so unfamiliar with these 3 at the back formations, because it's not common in the English leagues. And the same way you've got to be familiar with the formation, playing within that formation, that knowledge of the formation, the pros and cons of it, will also help you play against it. So if you look at Chelsea's average player position so far this season, you'll immediately see that Eden Hazard is actually their most advanced player, and that's a fact. And if you don't believe me, you can go on the BBC website and look at Pat Nevin's analysis on Eden Hazard this season for Chelsea. And if you don't know who Pat Nevin is, he's actually an ex-Chelsea player. I think he used to play right wing / right wing back. And Hazard has kind of been given a lot of roaming ability a lot of flexibility. Conte just kind of told him, look, go play as a striker for us. You're a world-class player. Just do whatever the hell you want to do to grab us goals. As opposed to last season where he's playing in a lot more structured environment, a lot more structured tactic, and it limited his freedom. And in my opinion, when you've got players as good as Hazard, you want to give them freedom, because that's when they'll be at their most comfortable, and that's how, in my opinion, you'll get the best out of them. And obviously, this freedom has helped Hazard rediscover his form from last season, and so far this season he's got 9 goals in 19 games, which is a phenomenal return, really. As we said earlier, this kind of formation really does require Conte style players. They've got to be hard-working, good defensively and good going forward. Just think Italian. Yeah, your wing backs, honestly, they've got to be machines, and that's why Victor Moses, I don't think a lot of people would have imagined that Victor Moses would make a good wing back, because he's not that good defensively. But because when he goes forward, you've now got an extra centre-back, it kind of works. So you don't really miss out on his defensive abilities, if you see where I'm coming from. But going forward, pace, stamina, hard work-wise, so even if Victor Moses isn't good enough defensively to get a tackle in, what you can count on him doing is, after a failed attack, being one of the first players zooming back down the pitch to get back in position and create that wall of 5 defenders in front of Courtois. And that's what you need, these hard-working players. And hard-working going forward, of course. If Chelsea mount an attack, he's got to be able to bomb down the right-hand side and provide width and potentially provide a cross as well. Really, really important. And as it says, one of the other reasons why these wing-backs need to be able to get back in time is because centre-backs don't tend to be as fast as full-backs. So if your opposition start counter-attacking, if they've got an incredibly fast player and you're playing with a relatively high line like Conte's 3-4-3 does, you might be in trouble, because 2 of your centre-backs split to create fake full-backs. You end up with 1 in the middle, and that could get punished on the counter-attack, if you see where I'm coming from, up against slow centre-backs. But it's very rare that it does happen. And another problem is, so you think about the midfield, you've got your 3 strikers, striker-style players, direct-style players, your big man, Diego Costa, the elephant man in the middle, your Hazard on the left and your Pedro on the right, or your Willian on the right. And then you've got your 2 box-to-box midfielders, and it's really important that these 2 box-to-box midfielders are incredibly hard-working as well. You ideally want these 2 midfielders to be not only good going forward, but defensively solid as well, because in the scenario where your wing-backs bomb forward, you want to at least ensure that one of the 2 can provide half-decent protection for the back 3, and it just makes you more solid defensively overall. But the problem is, so you've got these box-to-box style midfielders like Matic. I mean, you can argue Matic ain't much of a box-to-box midfielder, but he's really good defensively. He's not too bad going forward. Probably doesn't give you the same stamina that someone like Conte would, but he's been great under Conte, and it's easy to see why, because he's helping provide that extra bit of defensive stability for the back 3 when the wing backs bomb forward. Then you've got a player like Conte who can run for like 180 minutes, let alone 90 minutes. He wins the ball back for you. He's not too bad going forward. He's great. And the problem is, where do playmakers like Oscar or Fabregas fit in to that kind of system? Now, you can argue that, well, they could potentially fit into one of the front 3, but yeah. But how lethal would they be going forward on the counter-attack because of their lack of pace? You see what I mean? And it's no surprise we've seen Fabregas kind of get fringed out at Chelsea, and Oscar obviously sold to that Chinese team. Because those kind of playmakers that don't really give much legwork can actually hinder a system like this, which is built and based on hard work and grit for reasons we've discussed. So sometimes you can afford one loose player. And you think about Hazard, the player who has been given a license to roam, even he falls back to create the 4 in midfield, the bank of 4 in midfield, to make stuff defensively sound. So, you know, it's an interesting discussion. Where do these playmakers fit in? So here we go. As we can see in game, it's a blatant 3-4-3 when we're on the ball. We can see our 3 centre-backs there. So you can see how beneficial this is as opposed to two centre-backs, which we're used to traditionally seeing. And two of the centre-backs obviously push wide. There's one wing-back in Marcus Alonso, who there is essentially almost like a winger. And he has a license to bomb forward because we have an extra centre-back providing cover. And the exact same thing applies to Victor Moses in an offside position here. Conte and Matic almost like the anchors in midfield. And you can see how Hazard, Costa, and I think that's, Willian are quite narrow to try and outnumber the Manchester United defence. And you can see how nice it looks. I mean, you can see that Man United here with 22, 14 and Mata there. It's Mourinho. These players aren't going to do that much legwork, even though Mourinho likes them to do legwork, and that's actually why Mourinho got rid of Juan Mata from Chelsea. But that's a different story. But in this case, they weren't doing that much work defensively. AI's fault, I guess. They weren't really picking up my overlapping wing backs, and you can see we're basically outnumbering Man United in their own half, and that's what the use of these fullbacks allows you to do. And the three centre backs allows you to also maintain defensive stability. And you can see we're not outnumbered in midfield at all. The only threat we have is, like I said earlier, this space here where opposition wing backs, wingers with pace, they could exploit this space here. But when you've got players like Chelsea, it's really rare that they do make a mistake like that. And again, it's all about being versatile. It's all about making modifications where you need to, depending on the opposition you're playing against. So we can see here from the top, 3-4-3. That was, I think, the average position on the ball. You can see that in the match analysis thing. So the 3-4-3 off the ball, as you can see, our wing backs have now dropped back into almost like fullback positions. Man United only playing with Ibrahimovic up front, and you can see he's just outnumbered, this lad. He's probably used to coming up against two centre-backs, even though Ibrahimovic is quality. But in this case, he's got, I think that's Zuma and Luiz to his right and left. So there's only so much you can do, really. Hazard and the other wide man, I think that's Pedro there in that case, have both dropped deep to create this flank of four in midfield, and that's achieved by telling Hazard to man mark 22 and this 11 to man mark 11. And I know a question that's going to pop up is, isn't it a better idea to get these to man mark the to get these to man mark the fullbacks? The answer is no. I'm not going to go into details as to why, but someone asked the same question on my Klopp video, and it's in the comments. And do they do this in real life? No, they don't. Hazard won't be told to specifically man-mark this Man United player. Pedro won't be told to specifically man-mark this Man United player. But because of the limitations of the match engine, when you see the team shape, you'll see that Hazard and Pedro are both AMCs because of how narrow the front three are, and that works best. We'll discuss that in a bit. But when you've got three AMCs, the match engine won't naturally let them track back. It doesn't matter what you do. They will never track back and get in a wide position from here to here unless you specify man marking. So as long as you ensure the man marking is on the right player, in this case the wings, you can actually create this shape in midfield. And we do the same thing in the Klopp tactic. And you can see how difficult this is going to be for Man United to break down. So we were outnumbering them in their own half, and we're outnumbering them in our half as well. And it really is going to take something special if Man United are going to get past this wall of 5 Spartans in defence. So, as we can see, I didn't play a full season. I'm a busy person. I've not got time to play a full season. But if it wasn't for a 6-1 loss against Liverpool, hang on a minute, where I forgot to put the man marking on, we only will have conceded 11 goals this season, which really would have been great. And it kind of emphasises how good defensively this tactic is. But we've also scored simultaneously the most goals in the league. So the second most scored goals in the league are Arsenal on 41, and we scored 13 more goals than they have just after Christmas. That's a lot of goals. And you look at Conte in real life, his team is scoring for fun as well. Hazard, Diego Costa on fire. Here's a link to download the tactic at the bottom, but it'll be in the description link either way. So this is the formation, the shape that I've gone with. You can see the 3 at the back, the 2 wing backs, self-explanatory. David Luiz is our ball-playing defender. If we ever want to play out the back, we'll give the ball to him, and he'll push into midfield despite being on cover. We've got our 2 box-to-box support midfielders. That's because that is quite simply what Matic and Conte are in real life. They contribute both defensively and going forward. Especially when you go forward and try to flood the opposition, the wing-backs come wide. The box-to-box midfielder, it's not unusual to see him either hover around outside the box or even make a run into the box himself to again flood the opposition. And then we've got the front 3. Now a lot of people will look at the front 3 and be like, for God's sake, another strikerless formation. Your Klopp tactic was a strikerless formation. I don't like strikerless tactics. Never have done. I've been playing FM for a very long time and I don't like strikerless tactics. But it's what works very well this year. And I've not chosen it just because it works well this year. I've discussed why I chose it for the Klopp tactic, but it works really well for this system and it helps us mimic this system. And I'll explain why. So early on I said that if you look at these players' average positions, Eden Hazard has actually been Chelsea's most forward player this season. Now if I played Hazard as an AML or as a striker, if I play him as an AML, he'll be far too wide in comparison to how he's played for Chelsea this season. If I play him as a striker, even if I tell him to man-mark the opposition wide man, he won't man-mark the opposition wide man. He'll very rarely do it, which doesn't allow us to achieve the bank of 4 in midfield. So please, please, please look at this with an open mind. And I always say this, when it comes to Football Manager, what you might look at might not look right, but it's about how it performs on the field and how the instructions are applied to the team on the field, not what it looks like on the tactics screen, right? So judge this by how it performs and how similar it is to Conte's tactic, and a lot of people have tested it on FM base, and a few of the comments have said this is actually really similar to how Chelsea play in real life, and the same applies to my Klopp tactic with the gegenpressing. It looks a bit dodgy, but when you play it, you're like, you know what, this plays like Liverpool in real life, and that is the ultimate aim, not what it looks like on the tactic screen. You can make a tactic on a tactic screen that looks like what Conte's system is in real life, but if it plays nothing like it, doesn't leave you top of the league, what is the point? So Diego Costa this season has actually been dropping into midfield and helping the midfield out a lot, particularly physically. And if you watch them against Spurs yesterday, even though they lost against Spurs, if you haven't watched that, go back and watch it. Yeah, I was watching the game. Look at how deep sometimes Costa comes to help the midfield out. I know he's a goal scorer, but he's more than a goal scorer, and that's why he's worth so much. Just keep that in mind. I'm not going to carry on bombing on about that point. And that is why Diego Costa is also a shadow striker. So you've got Eden Hazard on the left. He'll have different player instructions to Costa. Costa in the middle. And if you're looking at him as a shadow striker and thinking, oh, he's not going to score enough goals, rubbish, and I'll prove you wrong in a sec. And then we've got the attacking midfielder on the right-hand side. And the reason why I've gone for an attacking midfielder is because, the attacking midfielder does less offensively, sits a little bit deeper, which gives us that extra link up with midfield. I just found that it works a little bit better than having 3 shadow strikers, but it won't make or break the tactics. If that's something you want to change, you can go ahead and change it. Alright, team instructions. So we've gone with the counter mentality. The reason why I've gone with the counter mentality is because I found that counter mentalities this year are really the only way to play counter-attacking football. In previous years, like before they changed the match engine, you used to have a button where you could tell your team to try and counter-attack when possible, and then it didn't matter what mentality you had, but this is another discussion. Gone with the fluid team shape, that's pretty obvious. Much higher tempo. Watch Chelsea in real life. The tempo at which they attack and counter-attack is unbelievable. Again, the fact that I'm saying counter-attack and the fact that we have a counter mentality does not mean we won't try to play out the back. It doesn't mean that your team won't go through periods where they're dominating possession. And you can see I've got retain possession selected. The width, fairly narrow, because they are pretty narrow in real life. Slightly higher defensive line, we're using the offside trap. Slightly higher or higher, really should be looking to use the offside trap. Closing down sometimes, don't overcomplicate things. They don't really gegenpress. They'll close you down when they need to, but at the same time they'll stand off. Like when your opposition have the ball in your own half, you've got the 5-4 and the 1 striker. Get stuck in, typical Italian football and typical Chelsea. go watch the Man City game. Play out of defence, retain possession, and mix passing style of play. That's what sometimes gives the players options to pass out the back. But the counter mentality and the higher tempo as well means that they do sometimes try to counter-attack forward. And this is going back to what we were talking about before, having those two options enabled. Now, this probably won't work for a low league side, but it's worked phenomenally with Chelsea because you've got that versatility, them options with the quality of players they have. We're going to be looking for the overlap without a shadow of a doubt. Even though we're telling them to exploit the middle, we tell them to also look for the overlap. So whenever the wing-backs overlap, you can put money on the fact that the ball will still go wide. It doesn't mean the ball won't go wide. The ball still will go wide. And most of your assists will, in fact, come from crosses from the wing-backs. Marcus Alonso, in my half a season save, actually has most of the assists so far in the Premier League, which is awesome. But that's it for team instructions. Player instructions, pause the video. I'm not going to go through these individually, other than mention the fact that, as you can see, the AML has a roam from position enabled on him, and apologies for that. That should say man mark AMR MR. The point is the AMR will man mark your opponent AML or /ML, and your AML will man mark your opponent AMR/MR, and that's what allows you, as I said earlier on, to create the bank of four in midfield. Opposition instructions, none. Sometimes opposition instructions work well in FM, sometimes they don't. In this case, don't mess around with stuff too much unless you know what you're doing. Otherwise, feel free to plug and play without any opposition instructions. Like I said, I used opposition instructions when I played Man United and beat them 4-0 because I knew what I was doing. So, talking about beating Man United 4-0, there it is. Costa with 2, Conte with 1. As you can see, there's a lot of green there. Premier League-wise, we've been unbelievable. 5 goals against Everton, 2 goals against Man City, 5 against Hull, 3 against Borough, 4 against West Ham, 4 against Arsenal, 4 against West Brom, 4 against Stoke, 4 against Man United, 4 against Bournemouth. Golo Kante getting the hat-trick, and that's what I mean by the box-to-box midfielders. He got that hat-trick by making late runs into the box. That's what you want from your box-to-box midfield. And then 3-0 win against Everton. Because you can see we started scoring more and more as the team started getting more and more familiar with the tactic. The only hiccup was this 6-1 loss against Liverpool. Now, if you want to make a big deal out of it, go ahead. It was just a test save. But the reason why we lost 6-1 against Liverpool is because I forgot to put man marking on. It was that simple. So if you're going to use it as a lesson for anything, just don't forget to put the man marking on. Otherwise, instead of a 5-4-1 off the ball, you'll end up with a 5-2-3. And your front three won't bother to do much defensively. Your 2 box-to-box midfielders will get significantly outnumbered. And boom, you'll end up being a little bit too deep with the 5 at the back. But yeah, so the results speak for themselves, I'd like to think. So yeah, Costa is a shadow striker. There is no need to be upset. Do not be upset whatsoever that Diego Costa is a shadow striker. I know he's meant to be a goal scorer and stuff, but forget the fact that he's a shadow striker. Let's just pretend he's a normal striker, right? He's got 12 goals in 16 appearances, which is more or less the same ratio he's got in real life. And he's scoring them goals by getting on the end of crosses. He's scored some of them goals by shooting from outside the box. Just because he's an AMC doesn't mean he's not going to be Diego Costa, right? He's still a shadow striker. Hazard, 8 goals in 19 appearances. Very similar ratio to real life as well. Performing very, very well with 7 assists to his name. Pedro with 10 appearances and 8 goals and 5 assists. Oscar with 7 goals, 5 assists. And again, I know I said how do playmakers really fit into this system. I got Oscar to fit in on the AMR attacking midfielder role, and I think he could in real life as well, but he's obviously not a Chelsea player. 4 goals for Matic, 7 assists for Matic, and that's what I said earlier. He's really solid defensively, but also very good technically, so he can contribute with them kinds of assists going forward. Marcus Alonso, most assists in the league, like I said, 10 assists. So Conte's system in FM 2017, conclusion, success. Like Klopp, we've succeeded at Conte. Don't expect plug and play. Micromanage. This isn't Football Manager 2012 anymore. You can't just download a tactic and magically expect to, I don't know, win the Ballon d'Or as a manager or something. Still, you know, you've got a brain, use it. And Football Manager nowadays is a lot less about what's going on tactically and a lot more about your management of players. Especially a team like Chelsea, Fabregas constantly unhappy, having a moan. Oscar having a moan. You know, John Terry having a moan. It's more about keeping morale as high as possible. It's good to have a good tactic, but you know, there's so many other elements into play that define how successful you are as a manager, including how man management, transfers, etc., etc. As with every tactic, you need the right players, otherwise micromanage. So my Klopp tactic, phenomenal Liverpool. Stick it into another team. Do they have the players with the high stamina, the high work rate to play gegenpressing? You tell me. If they got the pace to play gegenpress, you tell me. Don't plug and play it into like a team in the conference and complain that it doesn't work. The same applies to this. Educate yourself. Read up further on this topic. I've tried to keep things as concise as possible, and we're already over 30 minutes. Things like this are quite complicated. It's not easy to try and, you know, keep things concise. And I find sometimes it's best to try and simplify things and not overcomplicate things. I also dislike formations without strikers, but the FM tactic engine has a long way to go. Transfer tip, plenty of assists will come from the wide areas, so consider replacing Victor Moses. Or when Kurt Zuma's back, you can kind of play Kurt Zouma as the right CB, David Silva as the middle CB, and then Gary Cahill as the left CB, and then stick Azpilicueta on at right back. But you might need cover if you get rid of Moses. Moses has been phenomenal in real life. Unfortunately, his attributes on FM aren't probably as good as he's performed in real life. And at the end of the day, Football Manager's kind of a spreadsheet as well. Players will only really play as well as their attributes say they should. And yeah, the tactic was created on 17.2 on that version of the match engine. So just disclaimer, future updates may, I don't know, break things. And if they do, then I'll try and fix them, as I always try to do. But that is going to be it for understanding Conte's Chelsea. Hopefully I've been concise enough. Hopefully, you know, you kind of get what I'm going at. The next video on the channel is going to probably be another episode of my Blackburn Rovers Football Manager save. So if you're really intrigued by what I was saying about like being a versatile manager and stuff like that, you might want to go and watch it. So if you do, just hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and go and check it out on my channel. But again, guys, buzzing, we reached 120 subscribers. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Go try the tactic out. Any questions, drop a comment in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. As Conte would say, ciao, I think. I know that's how you say hello in Italian. I'm not sure if it's how you say bye, but we'll say ciao anyways. Ciao.